Hello and welcome to the Hackernoon podcast. My guests tonight are Brian Platz, the co-CEO at Fluree, and joining him today would be Dmitri Safine, the CTO at Ikigai Technologies, and Michael Yagi, the CEO at Ikigai Technologies. You are listening to this on Blockster.
Thank you. Thanks for
Thanks for having us.
Yes.
Most definitely. So let's start with Michael first, who probably is of an Asian heritage just like mine. So what did your parents think about when you said that you are going to get into the gaming industry as a developer and then you are gonna go build your own blockchain?
Oh yeah, so starting from the beginning then. Yeah,
I'm Asian too. I can feel your pain, man.
Yeah, for sure. Thankfully my parents are super supportive. I'm fourth generation Japanese, but the support that I get from my family is, it's kind of what enabled me to feel like I felt free to go into the gaming industry as a developer. So it's something that requires a lot of passion and dedication before you can go into something that sounds as easy as making games. It turns out it's a lot of hard work. So yeah, I kind of needed that extra support to kind of go get through that. So I'm glad they were extra supportive in that realm.
Most definitely, man. Thank you for making the stuff that makes life worth living. Like without games, I don't know where I'd be. But like, yeah, and also thank you for building blockchains. With,
Yeah.
that, with that, I'd like to move next to Brian. So, Brian, what has your journey been like? How did you end up in crypto? What mistakes did you make in your life that led you to crypto?
Well, let's start back a long time ago. Well, I've been in enterprise software, specifically in data management, which is our focus as a company for really my whole career now, which is, beyond 20, maybe 25 years, quite some time. And I originally got into starting software companies really because I wasn't very good at college. I attended college for 7 years. I still haven't graduated technically, and and I don't think I'm hireable, so no one would ever hire me, which leaves me with only one choice, which is to try and start my own thing. So that's what I've been doing for my whole career. And I've now been working with the same individual and the co-founder of Fluree, Filipowski, for 20 of the years that I've been doing this. And he was really the one who just really early on in Bitcoin just got hooked into the cryptocurrency scene and really dragged me, almost kicking and screaming at the time, into it. Like, this is really going to change things. And I'm like, I don't know, I'm just building my enterprise software apps and going about my own business. But it really started to sink in. And when we exited our last company and then started Fluree, was really an opportunity to start it, tinkering around a bit more. And we're really excited with where we've come.
That's quite interesting. With that, let's move to Dmitri, who was the CTO at Ikigai Technologies. And for those of you who don't know, the last time when we had a CTO of a blockchain company, he basically trashed a couple of other blockchains and we got a lot of backlash out of it. So I am looking forward to that. Trash other blockchains. I love that. With that, Dmitri, tell us how you've been and how you ended up in crypto.
I'm not gonna trash anything, so that's definitely not me. I'm not participating in those like religious wars, proof of work versus proof of stake. But what I can tell you, I'm relatively new to blockchain space as well, because if someone would tell me like a year ago that I would be a CTO of a blockchain related company, I would think they're hallucinating quite seriously because I relatively enjoyed what I was doing. I was a data engineer, business intelligence engineer. So I was working for Amazon. I was thinking, yeah, this is what my career is going to look like, year after next, I will grow the ranks, and this is what I was planning to do. But then I met a friend, my old friend, who kind of into blockchain, and he is a Bitcoin maxi. All you hear about him is Bitcoin, everything is Bitcoin, and sometimes maybe Ethereum, so those things. And he was like, Dmitri, you have to get in. Dmitri, you need to know. And not that I was not aware of Bitcoin, right? So I knew about it and I looked at it a long time ago when it just started, but somehow I missed the whole Satoshi's newspaper, white paper about what it means for the world, what impact it can have, on the world itself. To me, it was like, oh, it's just distributed ledger, something like related to accounting. Like I'm not interested, So this is how I missed it, and I did not pay much attention to it. So I thought it was like a speculative asset, like I don't want to be part of it. And then about maybe about a year ago, not less than a year ago, I looked really closely into it again. And again, I did not like what I saw, right? Because I saw the proof of work takes lots of energy, takes lots of resources from the planet. And I started researching altcoins. And this is how I encountered Cardano, right? There is a famous video from Charles Hoskinson, community calls it Whiteboard Cardano video. And I think this is a gateway drug to Cardano for anyone. They start watching it. And I immediately, as an architect, I got so enlightened. This is what I want to do. This is the pathway down very beautifully for me, where I can participate, how can I contribute. And since then, it's been a journey, because once you start getting into it, your old job does not make sense to you anymore. Right. So I was really struggling. I was like, nothing that was not decentralized stopped making sense to me. Like I see people building stuff around, interesting things that I was interested in before. But now if it's not blockchain, if it's not decentralized, I'm not interested, So this is how kind of moved me into Ikigai technologies. Michael found me. Yeah.
Most definitely. Like for all of the kids listening, crypto is like heroin. Stay away from it unless you are in it for life.
Exactly.
Right. And what is your experience with Charles Hoskinson? Like Charles Hoskinson was the first guest on my podcast, and he is what you would call a very attractive figure, right? Like he has very strong opinions. What he likes, he loves. What he doesn't like or what he doesn't understand, he hates. So like he was telling me about the problem with the Cardano community. It's probably because he was one of the co-founders at Ethereum, and then when he left, uh, every interview that he gave, they started to compare him to Ethereum or to Vitalik. They would be like, okay, so Cardano is the answer to Ethereum or whatnot. And his main concern was, I want to erase that lines of comparison. In your opinion, Dmitri, do you think it has happened? Because now, at least as of today, as of 2021, September, Cardano stands as itself. It is getting the smart contracts, their programming language is completely different. The ecosystem is robust. What do you have to say on that matter, the evolution of Cardano?
I would say to start from Charles Hoskinson, right? Because you asked, like, what do I think of him?
Right.
To me, he is a very inspiring figure, right. And I followed lots of inspiring figures of the past, like Jiddu Krishnamurti and such, and some even spiritual leaders, who kind of can lighten the spark inside you, right? So I see Charles Hoskinson as one of these people, because he really thinks very far, so his objectives are not even today. His objectives like decades from now, this is where he is aiming. And if you listen to him carefully, he executes on those objectives every single day, nevertheless. This is what he always says on his videos, right? I wake up in the morning, I work on Cardano, I make Cardano happen, I don't work on anything else. He's a very passionate person. But it's fascinating to see how, because I mentioned that whiteboard video, which happened 3 years ago, right? And he drew everything on the white paper, what he wanted to do. And now we see it happened, like one step after another step, one epoch after another epoch, he actually built it. And now smart contracts are going to be released on September 12th on Sunday, and this is part of this plan. And I have no doubt that the other things that he planned, like Altair era, and Basho eras that are going to bring the self-governance and the scalability to the platform, they are going to happen as well. So we also see lots of FUD coming from the ETH Maxis, community, that they try to trash Cardano and say, hey, Cardano is nothing, Cardano is a ghost chain. Not at all, because I think this is just them being scared, because it's really, really strongly coming to potentially replace Ethereum, because there are things that are in the making right now, like ERC20 converter, that would possibly bring lots of the application currently working on the Ethereum blockchain onto Cardano blockchain with a relatively little effort. So definitely Cardano came about like to be very, very strong right now. And we have no doubts that it's going to succeed.
Most definitely. And like you stand vindicated on that. I was speaking to some other developer who built on Ethereum but are gonna move over to Cardano. And I was like, but you don't even know Haskell. And he was like, Cardano is so simple. I just like need 5 or 6 lines of code, and that's all that is needed to port my product from Ethereum to Cardano itself. Is that true?
Well, I did not have that experience yet because I don't know yet Haskell myself. I'm learning it. So I'm more familiar with the imperative languages. And the reason why I don't know, because I have not built a system on Ethereum, right? So if I have, probably that would be my reality as well. But we are building from scratch, right? So we are building Logosphere. That's something that we'll be talking about today, being a Cardano product, right? It originates from Cardano blockchain, from Cardano community. So we're not looking at the Ethereum at the moment. We're building our own thing.
Got it. And more like power to you. Let me switch gears to Brian. So Brian, as Dmitri just pointed out, like what you guys are doing is basically going into uncharted waters. Do you think that people like you, who you said are like not hireable, but I would use the word don't fit into the molds that society has granted us? They want us to like fit in that box. Some of us don't want to. It is not a question of you, it's more of who you want to be. So do you think that people like you are more suited in this changing ecosystems because you have been adapting for the longest time ever? Or do you think that the people with the classical educations and the classical knowledge in those systems are going to have a better day?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I hate to draw a distinction because I know a lot of people who went through classical education who I very much look up to and I think are extraordinarily talented and adaptive. And then there's people like me who didn't necessarily make it through that system. Well, you can form your own opinion, but
that is your adaptability, right? That is your adaptability. People with classical education, they would always have their biases. You would.
Yeah, but so I do think there's, people can come from any sort of background and be really successful in different environments. But I do think, and I don't know, the blockchain space brings out, I think, a lot of interesting characters. Some come from the tech world, which is what I'm probably most familiar with. And I think a lot of tech people, and one of the reasons I love tech is because I think they have that adaptability, that passion. They want to, build things. And then, of course, the blockchain community, brings out a lot of sort of almost political viewpoints as well, right. Which is something that, I don't necessarily need to get in the middle of. But I think that those, tech people in general have a lot of those qualities, and probably the tech people in crypto probably even have more of those.
That makes a lot of sense. Like I have this joke. So whenever somebody tells me that they are against vaccines, I almost believe that they would believe in like Bitcoin now because there are so many similarities. Okay. But like, let's switch gears to Michael. So Michael, what does your day-to-day look like? Like, do you check out social media a lot when it comes to what you are building? Or are you like, heads down, I'll focus on what I'm doing and I will let my work speak for it?
Yeah, I'm not, maybe I should be a little bit more, but I'm not too focused on social media. I guess you could say my day-to-day job is more about like creating a vision and communicating it so that other people can get behind it, and then presenting a path forward with clear deliverables. And then after that, basically like finding people that can do the things that I can't, and just creating a working environment where we can build something that
Mm-hmm.
goes
Mm-hmm.
toward that vision. So I'm more of a enabler in that sense.
Right. So enable us to understand, like, how does Fluree and Ikigai fit into the Cardano ecosystem, or does it stand on its own? Like, explain this project to us, explain this like integration to us.
Yeah. So at a high level view, I'm sure Brian and Dmitri can chime in more on the details later, but the high level view, there's kind of Cardano is great for having like contracts and the transactions that need to be verified formally. But what is kind of lacking a little bit is on the metadata, you can only embed a certain amount inside of it. And where Fluree can come in as a sidechain is putting in more rich metadata where you want to start storing stuff that can relate to each other in more rich and meaningful ways, and be able to index into it and search it much quicker than you would be able to scan through the blockchain itself.
So speaking of the Fluree integration, so Brian, could you like walk us through what are these limitations when it comes to metadata? Because like, as somebody who understands blockchain fairly, like not so fairly well, like when somebody says that, I think it's probably about the block height. What would you have to like educate me on?
So especially public blockchains, just due to, inherently how they operate for very good reasons, it makes it difficult to store a lot of data, because that data needs to be replicated. It needs to be done so in a very fast manner. And a lot of information is just hard to do. You can't, sometimes I say you can't get around Einstein, you got the speed of light, but then even just getting something from here to China, through the router hops and everything, it takes about a second to do. These things really need to process quickly. So the leaner it can be as far as data exchange, the more effective blockchains can be in other things. So, that's the fundamental reason why they limit the data. And so they're focusing more on assets, tokens, something tradable. It's about moving shells around and knowing who has one at a given time, whether that shell is a NFT piece of art or that shell is a piece of currency. That's kind of what they're focused on. A database, which is really what Fluree is more about manipulating information over time and being able to build rich applications on top of it. It's a very different objective than moving things around. And you sort of need both of them if you're going to do anything kind of complicated. So it really brings up then the problem that, okay, if I can't get, how do I start building really rich applications if I can't manage data in a very nimble way? And so that's why you end up needing to pair something like a Fluree with a public blockchain to both, prove who owns what or who has what asset at what given time, but then also have this sort of rich metadata layer.
Like, can you give us some examples? Like, let's use the example of a DEX, right? So there can be DEXs everywhere, like everybody can have their own liquidity pool. Why does a Cardano need a Fluree? Like you said, comprehensive, rich data, but can we have some examples on that?
Yeah, I mean, well, and I'm going to pass it over to Dmitri in just a second to talk about the NFT example, because I think that's a really good one. It's a tangible one, but it's also a very, very simple one. You can solve some of the NFT problems without a actual database. Some of them start to get a little bit harder, but you can use something like a file system to solve some of the metadata challenges, like an IPFS. But yeah, when you look at data changing over time, there's all kinds of use cases. We currently work with, for example, the U.S. Department of Education ACE program around verifiable credentials. Fluree is basically a JSON LD database. A verifiable credential is basically wrapped in JSON LD. But importantly, it uses DIDs. It uses DIDs to not only prove identity, who's signing a particular piece of content, but it uses DIDs to uniquely represent things. So in the case of education, it might be a transcript or a degree. That's very rich data. It needs to be permissioned, but it also changes over time, especially if I'm still going to school, or maybe I do something that upsets the university later on and they want to revoke my degree. So that's an example where something needs to be manipulated, but very traceable over time. That's a slightly more complicated problem than an NFT. And now you're getting into needing something to handle that. But where are things going? I mean, we're just not doing this to build NFTs and to build, verifiable credentials. We're here to, have solutions that can replace very complicated software used in enterprises. And then that is really where you need this richness of capability, because you can't build a CRM or a content management system or a supply chain management system with these very limited capabilities. You need a world database to be able to do this. And this is what the community doesn't have. Fluree is that world database. Cardano is that world app server. Filecoin or IPFS is that world file system. These are the three components any sort of complicated app end up needing.
A very interesting way to put it. Dmitri, how much data would somebody need on the blockchain? It's a very loaded question. Bill Gates once said 640 kilobytes is something that the world would ever need.
It's very funny because I always use that quote when I was trying to make argument for the same system that we're talking about now, right? Which is we call it logosphere, right? So because when I saw 16 kilobyte limitation of the metadata block on Cardano, like this won't do, for the majority of the real world applications, from my experience, you do need much richer data in order to build a decent dApp, right? And our somewhat passion is NFTs, right? So we started working with NFTs, and we think that NFTs are going to play a big role in the future. So currently they're kind of in their infancy. People think of NFTs, oh, it's just a piece of art. Someone drew something, it looks cool, and then someone can sell it for, for tons of money on the auction, right? So this is kind of like mint and sell model. It's a model that people are exploring now, and some people get really rich on it, but I think it's all the baby steps, like it's only the beginning. I think that NFTs, they can represent practically anything, an idea, a patent, your house, with everything in it, complex supply chain system, can be also built around NFTs, where you pass anything that can be digitalized as a token can be an NFT, right? And once you start really moving away from that simplistic scenario when you just mint something and then you sell it, which you can do on a public blockchain, no problem. You don't need Fluree for that, right? But once you start getting into more complicated scenarios like a supply chain management, or what we're passionate about is the creative value chain management, because we want to build something that is going to attract artists, musicians, who would be able to exchange the pieces of the metadata between themselves, whether it's going to be an image or a sound or an idea, a patent or something like this, and have it being immutable and provable, and decentralized, that at any point in time, if you contributed in that process, no one questions your contribution. You can always go, you can check it out, and you can see it. So this is something that requires lots of data, and that requires the data to be immutable and traceable over time. And this is what Fluree is perfect at, because it's practically a mutable ledger, but it's immutable at any given point in time, right? So as soon as you modify the data, it creates a next practically reality for you. It moves like frames, like it's just basically you're on this frame, the next moment you're in another frame, but you can always get back to the previous frame. So this is how it just basically operates. So you can always prove what's been going on. And this is why Fluree is particularly attractive for something that needs to be completely traceable. And because it's also based on the semantic web standards, the data can be exchangeable between different dApps and different ecosystems, between different blockchains, maybe even. So because the moment when you start thinking about developing a dApp, the question immediately comes, where do I store my data? Like where do I put it, right? So, and usually if we don't suggest anything at this moment, obviously we cannot force people into it, but if we don't suggest anything, the intuition of solutions architect is going to be, oh, let's just bring a relational system, let's just bring something like PostgreSQL, and we will put all the data outside of blockchain as an off-chain data storage, and we will do something with this data, and then the result of that calculation or that process, we're going to be basically recording in the on-chain, let's say in Cardano. But problem with that is, because if you do it in a centralized database, it loses that attraction of the immutability and the proof, right? So you cannot trust that system anymore. You cannot trace it anymore. And this is a problem, because it kind of moves us into a paradigm that we kind of came up together with Brian, is like a centralized, decentralized application, when it sits on top of the blockchain, but you cannot call it decentralized, because the key components of that solution is going to be still in a centralized environment, right? And what we are offering is the metadata layer, which is going to be completely decentralized, and we will try to make it as simple as possible to use for the Cardano community that is going to be building the apps, and they will be able to use it just as a regular database and not thinking about where do they store the data. And it's just going to go and spread out and replicate itself across the nodes in the Cardano network.
Very interesting, and again, very comprehensive and succinct at the same time. I'm trying to see a pattern over here. So I'll move to Michael now. Michael, I'll give you an example. So my sister-in-law is an artist, right? She draws stuff. Now I just told her, why don't you start building NFTs? And she was like, what is it? I tell her what it is. Now, how does she choose which blockchain to use for building an NFT? Or should she just go the route of the OpenSeas and the Raribles of the world?
Gotcha. Yeah, I think from a creative perspective, of whether it be an artist or musician, frankly, I don't know if it should come down to whether they're thinking about the blockchain that they're using. It should be coming down to what does the platform offer, and eventually what blockchain and the technologies underneath will be abstracted away. So you're just getting the value that the blockchain offers without having to think about it. So really it'll be coming down to the companies and the people that build their platforms on top of it, that it's up to them to create a user experience that can attract artists that they cater to, so that they don't have to worry about things like blockchain. Eventually it'll be so ubiquitous that you're just using it without really knowing.
Like that is the world where we all want to be in, right? Where you can use stuff without having to know stuff. I guess we had a very similar system with fiat until everybody started to analyze how much we can meddle with fiat, and look where it got us. I'd like to move next to, I'm sorry, go for it, Michael.
Oh, I was just going to add, there's definitely certain levels where the artist has certain concerns where the blockchain does matter, and that's where we think one of the reasons why we pick Cardano is some of the artists care about certain things like the environmental impact and how much NFTs really cost for that, or the fees that are generated from it. So in that sense, right now we're still at a kind of a part in the road where you do kind of have to care about the technologies until everyone solves the core underlying problems of that. So that's one of the reasons why if artists do want to do a little bit deeper research, they will kind of stumble upon solutions like ourselves, where we're choosing to build on Cardano. So the fees are going to be much lower, if not free, and it's going to be a lot more efficient to run our network as well compared to solutions such as Ethereum.
Yeah, Brian, and it comes down to proof of work versus proof of stake, right? So how do you basically prove that something happened on your blockchain, right? So two different consensus algorithms.
Gotcha. Like that. That's a choice that, and some people just are I wanna eat chicken, and they will go for proof of work. I don't know how that works out. But Brian, how does the Fluree ecosystem fit in with the, let's say, the opportunities that Cardano has, and then build on top of it? What has your experience been like? Because it's very easy for the Ethereum developers, because they have the Solidity frameworks, they have a huge developer community that they can go and ask for help about. How is the experience on the Cardano side of things like? Because this is one of these arguments that every Ethereum developer brings when somebody says, let's build on some other blockchain.
Yeah, well, I guess my experience from afar has been that they have a tremendous amount of tools available and a very exciting community building around it. I mean, I think that when you look at the interest in Cardano, at least, and you think about other blockchains over the past 12 months, it clearly stands out.
Right.
And I think it's standing out like that in its acceleration and adoption and excitement is because it has such a supportive and enthusiastic community built around it. So I think if people are currently working with Ethereum, for one, I think this whole space is probably too early to completely pick sides anyway. You know, so there should, I think, probably be a willingness of people to try out different things as new ideas are emerging. But I think that people will have good experiences if they're looking to try. Now, how you program in it, and you know, it's going to be a little bit different. I am a big-time Clojure developer, so I'm a huge fan of functional style programming. And for that reason, I really like Cardano's approach to doing things as opposed to kind of the more imperative style. But so people have their preferences for things like that, the environments and the tools. But I think there's a lot of interesting capability that the technologies are bringing at a more fundamental level that people should experience multiple.
Now let's try this fun exercise. I want you guys to tell me at least one thing each about Cardano that is not available on any other blockchain. Let's start with Dmitri first.
I would say that would be the whole vision of the Cardano, how the Cardano is going to fund the projects on itself, you know. So this is something that is not available in Ethereum, and this is what on other blockchains that, as far as I know of. But this is something that Charles Hoskinson started thinking early enough, you know, when he started thinking about Cardano, is to build a treasury and the governance model around the treasury that allows the Cardano to fund itself in the decentralized manner, right? So because at some point in time, like once your ICO money are running out, you know, and when you still need to evolve, you're facing the question, like, where do I attract the funds, you know, to progress with the development of the decentralized system? And your options are usually either VCs, you know, who come, but they also want to kind of to control you, you know, and if you're trying to run away from everyone's control, how do you make it in non-chaotic way, but in a very directed way, but at the same time in decentralized way? And this is what is currently being implemented as a project catalyst. Right now, I think it's the biggest decentralized fund, like the innovation fund around the world. I think the latest funding was about 4 million, for 4 million that is kind of trying to fund all kinds of projects who are for anyone who wants to submit a proposal in Project Catalyst. The community votes, and if they think that this is a solution that is worth building, so you get funded from that treasury to build your solution. This is how our Logosphere project got funded, right, in Fund 5. So I think this is very unique, and I think is very sustainable, you know, in a way how it's organized and how it's operating right now. So that's one thing that I would bring up.
Right. So I think I might be oversimplifying stuff, but don't you think that other blockchains also have own DAOs and their own funding mechanisms like this? Is it a very unique feature?
Well, I would have to look into the specific blockchains, how they're doing it, because I started practically with Cardano, so I know more about Cardano, but Cardano is building it inside the protocol, right? So it's just basically part of the blockchain itself. So I'm not sure how the other blockchains doing it. Is it like a separate thing from the blockchain itself, or it just could be all kinds of different ways of doing it. So like, I cannot comment on this. So I know what Cardano has.
You might be onto something, because having it at the protocol level is is like inherently more secure. Like Brian can speak more on that. So Brian, like what's your take? Like what is the one unique thing that no other blockchain has?
I think the focus on the functional programming side and Haskell is actually something worth paying attention to. You know, functional programming, not only can you write things in a more concise way, like I said, I'm sort of a closure developer at the core, but I can write more in 10 lines of closure than someone could write in 300 lines of Java. So they lend themselves to actually be very compact, but I don't necessarily know that the benefit, that's the main benefit. The big benefit, as I think it relates to blockchains for the functional style programming, is that it puts an emphasis on pure functions. It puts an emphasis on non-mutating state, and all of these things end up making code more provable and testable. And when you're putting code on a blockchain, you want to make sure there's no fundamental holes or issues with it. Right. So at the core, Cardano's choice of Haskell is largely for that reason. Everything is mathematically provable as far as the smart contract. It's going to avoid issues where people have errors in their smart contracts, unintentional errors that might leak code. So it should be more secure.
On that note, because you like mentioned holes in the code, probably let's like call them bugs. So is there a world where if there is a bug in your smart contract on the Cardano blockchain, it can be upgraded or updated?
Well, I have to ask Dmitri on that one.
Yeah, so Cardano has something is called hard fork combinator, right, that they developed, and it's done in a very good way, you know, that usually when Cardano needs to upgrade itself, you know, when it moves into the new deliverable on their roadmap, it usually goes really, really smooth, you know, because it's built in the system. And usually when they say we're going to deliver that, you know, this is what is going to be coming, like smart contracts release is going to come on Sunday on 12. We have no doubts that it's going to go smooth because of that hard fork combinator technology that is inside Cardano itself. So they're very resilient to kind of unexpected situation when bugs happen. You know, first of all, they test it well, and second of all, like the whole upgrade is going usually very smooth.
Got it. And that just leaves like, Michael, what's your take on that? Is there like anything unique to Cardano? And like, if yes, what is it?
Yeah, I think beyond the technical side of it being on Haskell and being provable, one of the things that I really appreciate about Cardano is kind of the approach that they're taking. So, for example, there's a large focus in Africa, and the reason why that to me is very smart is when you're using a new technology that's as disruptive as blockchain, it's hard to convince traditional companies right out the gate to switch to something new when there's no inherent need to disrupt yourself. Whereas when you go to markets such as Africa, there's people that are unbanked or people that are struggling to, figure out how to manage resources in property management, or there's holes and there's not as such of an infrastructure that's already built up that we take for granted over here, like being able to PayPal or Venmo somebody really quickly. So there's a much greater need for adopting such technologies such as blockchain or Cardano there. So I think it's smart, but it's also nice to be able to cater to people that are actually going to benefit from the system first. And then in turn, like enterprise companies will start adopting it because they don't want to be left behind. So of course, there's going to be people like us that are in the US that are looking to adopt it, but just focusing your efforts on people that actually need it first is kind of what separates Cardano in my mind. Yeah.
Gotcha. Very interesting. Let's take a step back to Fluree again. So, Brian, you explained Fluree as a zero trust ledger, and which enables to have comprehensive metadata on the blockchain, or at least as a sidechain. How does that work out, and why do you think Cardano doesn't have it natively?
Well, there's, boy, there's so much. So I'm going to try and keep it in just a minute here.
You don't have to, though. You don't have to give it in a minute, though.
Okay. Well, so we have a philosophy along with our technology, which is that in today's world and in tomorrow's world, the data itself actually becomes more valuable than the application. Mm-hmm. And we call this data-centric or data first. And I think everyone can look around and see that the world is starting to change like that.
Right.
When we look at something like Ethereum or Cardano, in my eyes, what I see is an application server. An app server where a smart contract is your app. And they are an application-centric approach, not a data-centric approach, meaning that a developer created it, and then the developer is going to decide what state, what data is required for their app, and then they're going to, create some custom schema and some custom data to fit into it.
Right.
Fundamentally, every smart contract is creating another data silo.
Right.
And when you're creating a bunch of them on the blockchain and they're all supposed to represent common things like an NFT, what you end up with is millions of data silos.
Right.
How is the ecosystem ever going to bring useful tools to that situation where we're back in the same problem we have in the enterprise, which is about half of the IT budget is spent just to integrate data? But who's going to pay for that in the public blockchain space, right? At least we got the corporations to pay for it when it's their own data. So now we have all these data silos. So how does something like an NFT marketplace ever live? Because every smart contract, every NFT has its own schema, its own whatever, and someone would literally have to go in and basically build a data warehouse with millions of different things. Who's going to do that work? No one can.
Right.
So in a data first world, we sit on top of the W3C semantics. And I think it's fascinating. So Tim Berners-Lee really introduced a lot of these standards. And of course, most people will know Tim Berners-Lee is credited to have invented the web to begin with.
Father of the internet. Yeah.
Father of the internet. Yeah. So he put out in 2003 or 4, this is years before Bitcoin, all the different core technologies to enable the semantic web, which is the data to data web, right? What we use the web for right now is the human sort of web, the data to data web. And he put a couple in his famous sort of layer cake diagram. He has 2 big boxes. One is crypto and the other is trust. And even when he put that out, he says, I don't know how this is going to get done. I just know that for data to be truly interchangeable and usable across the world, these things have to exist. This is well before Bitcoin even existed.
Agreed.
And I think blockchain started to fill in those holes and say, here's how we're going to start to make data interchangeable. So our focus is not only on having that immutable ledger and kind of having like a Git or GitHub for data where you can trace the changes and go back and have time travel. But importantly, it's all about sitting on these interoperability standards that allows us to integrate data without people having to physically do it, because that's never going to work in this world. It's going to hold this entire decentralized movement back because there's too much cost, energy, and difficulty in it. We can solve that if we start thinking about this now. That's why this is really important. And Cardano creates an excellent opportunity because it is new. Smart contracts are coming out this weekend. They are not sort of already burdened by what people have done over the last 3-5 years. If we can sort of pave this path, I think it can create a really strong ecosystem where data can be shared and value is there.
Yeah, and kind of adding on to that. So that's where we got super interested in working with Brian, and we saw the value in that. That's why we are working on the project Logospheres to make it so that if people are familiar with the traditional ways of doing development, they want the benefits to what Brian's talking about. That's what the package of Logosphere aims to solve, is to make it really easy for people to do this kind of thing. So maybe Dmitri, you can talk a little bit more about how we make it easy for people.
Yeah, so the project Logosphere, as we call it, which is going to have Fluree, ultimately will be done on Fluree technology. But what we are trying to do with it is to make it as easy as possible to work with the semantic graph database for dApp developers. Because what we find as soon as we start mentioning, semantic graphs, graph databases, not a lot of people are familiar with them, and it could be a bit of a pushback. Why should I use it? Should I spend my time learning about them? So we want to make it as easy as possible. So if you create a dApp, you will have your business object library that you can generate, from the schema that you define in the format of the JSON schema. And that is going to give you the familiar objects, like if you heard about frameworks like Hibernate or the Sequelize in Node.js, right? So the similar thing, when you have your domain objects already pre-generated for you, and you just create a business logic with them, and that is going to give, basically, this is what your development experience is going to look like. You instantiate them from the graph database, you modify them, and you persist them back into the graph database. And the whole aspects of dealing with the graph database is going to be abstracted away from the dApp developers. So this is what we are trying to build with this project and make practically this as easy as possible for everyone in the community.
Right. So Dmitri, you speak the language of programmers. Let's try something new with you. Explain zero trust, but not imagine, I am not a programmer. Explain zero trust to me, who is not a programmer.
It is basically explaining your distributed ledger, right? I have a very interesting paradigm to that I was trying to explain to someone. Right. Just imagine a religious community. We're not going to talk about religious communities, but let's say everyone has a copy of the book, Right? Same book. It could be a Bible, it could be a Quran, could be Bhagavad Gita, but everyone has exactly the same copy. And if someone starts saying that, oh, something like this is written in this book, like you can always go and you check and verify if in your copy of the book it says the same, right? You can interpret the meanings. We're not talking about the meanings. We're talking about literal text, right?
Text, yeah.
And let's say if someone starts claiming that, oh, in my book something is different, than in all the others books, immediately everyone else is going to tell you, hey, you're wrong. We're not accepting your truth because our truth is basically we agree on it. Like at least majority of us agree on it, right? So now the blockchain in itself is just like an appendable version of the same type of a scenario. Imagine that the book that you can write at the end, but you cannot change anything that has been written before that, right? So exactly the same thing. And from that, with that analogy, you can explain what is that 51% attack, right? So let's say everyone have the book, and for example, you have a Christian community or Muslim community, and all of a sudden, 51% of that community starts saying, oh, something is different is written on our books, and then you lose that trust. You lose basically the ability to verify it, because if majority of the people start claiming the opposite, this is when your trust system disintegrates, right? So basically, zero trust to me is just to always having that decentralized copy of some version of truth that can be always formally verifiable among the majority of the community who holds those copies. So that's in a nutshell.
So how does that look like in this example? So I have a book, you have a book. How do we verify whose truth is right? Wow, whose truth is right?
Oh, this is where consensus mechanisms come from, right? So in the proof of work, you just have to do lots of cycles or lots of CPU cycles, solving the hashing problems, and the one who solves the hash problem first is just kind of proves who can produce the next block in the blockchain, which means basically writing at the end of that whole text, and adding it. And if, let's say, it disagrees, with the rest of the people, if someone tries to hack it, so this is going to be rejected, right? Because the algorithm is smart enough kind of to choose the longest chain in that path, and this is what is being taken as a truth. So proof of work works differently because it does not require that CPU cycles, that basically the work being produced and energy being consumed. So it's controlled by the stake pools in Cardano network that people who hold ADA, they are participating, and they are chosen by the random algorithm to produce the next blocks, and the other network has to agree on them, right? So it's just basically, it always comes to some sort of the consensus. So Cardano has their Ouroboros protocol that they use as a consensus mechanism, right? So, and it always comes to the consensus of the majority, and that majority can be sliced and diced and picked randomly. So you don't have to ask the whole network to confirm it for you, but you can basically take the random sample of that distribution and ask, yeah, is it truth? And they say, yes, it is. So that's ultimately how it works.
Gotcha, right? Gotcha. And I'd like to end this episode on a SAR note. Michael, what is your experience with regulators?
Can you clarify that a little bit more for me, please?
Like, how do the regulators view your product as you need to check a lot of boxes, but while you are doing that, you have to explain to the regulators as to what an NFT is. Like, try explaining to someone that an invisible rock was sold for $1 million. They just don't accept it. So, like, there would be 1,000 other things that you are doing where you need regulatory approval or where you need the right paperwork to be signed, and you have been stonewalled, or maybe you were not stonewalled. Like, what has your experience been like?
To be honest with you, we haven't actually hit that roadblock yet of people asking us questions for how does regulation work. So we're reaching out to get some legal advice of how do we position ourselves and make sure we're ready for when those questions do come, to be one step ahead, so we can act accordingly and plan. But as far as what it looks like now, we're the same kind of questions that you're asking. So I don't have a good answer for you.
Fingers crossed for you, man. Like, that's what I'm saying. So on that note, I'd like to end this episode of the Hackernoon podcast. And if like any of you have any messages for the Hackernoon audience, like, we would love to hear them from you now. Let's start with Brian.
Well, the purpose of originally getting on here is this exciting project of Logosphere. So, Dmitri or Michael can give the web address to learn a little bit more about it. But I think we have a real opportunity with Cardano and with thinking about data first, or data centric, to have a much more substantial impact on what this industry will ultimately provide anything from individuals in Africa we talked about to, different types of users of all sorts. So I think it's really exciting. We can take some steps, and we'd love some people to, just get involved. Yeah.
Most definitely. Let's pass the mic over to Dmitri.
Yes, exactly the same. I would love people to check out the website. It's https://logosphere.io. It explains more about the project. So we're in the middle of writing like a comprehensive white paper about it, but I think website has enough information to get a gist of what we're trying to build. Everyone is welcome, definitely. We're not like only geared towards Cardano, just anyone, because we read a report recently from Deloitte that about 48% of the projects not related to blockchain are thinking about building a data sharing ecosystem, right? And 84% are going to be basically thinking about it, building it in 5 years. So I would welcome everyone, if any CTO of any company or any solutions architect is listening to it now and is remotely interested in what blockchain is and what it can provide for them and how can it advance their business forward, to check it out and just to start seriously thinking about creating decentralized solutions. Because I think it's a very disruptive technology, and we're at the fork in our IT progress of the whole IT industry, similar to when trade went from the brick and mortar into online. At some point in time, the applications that are not decentralized they are not going to be trusted, right? So, and we're thinking that this is a real opportunity for now for the whole IT industry who try to build new products, to think about building them in decentralized way. So, and we are here trying to facilitate that progress and that development.
Interesting take, like systems built on trust will not be trusted. Nice. Let's move over to Michael. Michael, what do you have to say about this?
Yeah, for sure. And then on the other end too, of people that are more curious and they understand the values that Brian and Dmitri are talking about that come from these systems, but don't know how to actually use it. Logosphere is still a great place to go to figure out, hey, I'm just a dApp developer and the things that you're talking about sound great. Like I want to use them, but I'm not an expert in those areas. Is this still a good place for me to go look at and learn more about it? It most definitely is, because the solution that we're trying to provide is also targeted at dApp developers that want to store off-chain data and have the meta layer data powered by like the decentralized semantic graph database as a sidechain, but you don't have to be an expert in that area to use it. So that's kind of the beauty of what Logosphere is about, is making it really accessible to people that want the benefit, but aren't sure how to go about using it or writing it from scratch themselves.
Gotcha. Thank you, Michael. And with that, I'd like to call it a wrap. Best wishes to Fluree, best wishes to Ikigai Technologies, and best wishes Charles Hoskinson for your smart contract launch on the 12th. We would be looking forward. Thank you, guys.